right, welcome back to the Mintcast, everyone. I'm your host today, Alan MacLeod, senior staff writer and podcast producer here at Mint Press News. And as always, we're facing massive algorithmic suppression. So if you could support us on Patreon, link will be down below. We do very much appreciate all of our subscribers. If you're not in an economic position to help us in that way, you can still aid us by giving the stream a like or sharing it with friends. And I think you will want to share this one this week because we have a fantastic guest lined up on the Mintcast today. It's only JT Chapman from the popular channels First Thought, Second Thought, and The Deprogram. JT, how are you?
Oh, shucks, you're too kind. I'm doing great in the dream here.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I guess for some of the people who don't know you, why don't you just really quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is JT. I live in Texas, and I started the YouTube channel Second Thought back in 2017. Back then, I did kind of like infographic style, explainer, sciencey adjacent videos, and I got really bored with that. And so in 2020, I snapped. I was like, all right, you know what? I'm gonna take this channel, which at that point had I think 750,000 subscribers, something like that. And I'm going to do something useful with this platform. So I started talking about left-wing ideas, started talking about socialist economics and history and things like that. And that really, it resonated with people in a way that kind of surprised me. I thought, okay, I'm going to make one video, get this socialist stuff off my chest and then go back to making the boring stuff that I really hate. But people loved it. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to stick with this. And from then on, it was a socialist channel.
Yeah, and I guess it's pretty surprising because you've actually managed to double that audience since I think you're now the biggest left-wing or anti-capitalist YouTuber going. So yeah, I mean, you're super popular right now, and I can see why. And just going back through your videos that I've been watching, it was really hard to choose what I wanted to talk to you about. So this first video I want to show you, a lot of people rag on solar power quite a lot, and generally the renewable industry a bit more. But JT, actually, you make a really interesting point here that I've never heard anyone else really make here. And let's watch that and find out.
The thing is that even if we assumed solar energy could be a silver bullet solution to climate change, instead of looking at a more comprehensive approach, if we could set all these problems aside, there's still something that's been plaguing the renewable energy transition this whole time that low prices don't fix and might actually even hurt. They may be cheap, but renewables just aren't profitable. In May 2019, the International Energy Agency found that for the first time since the 2000s, renewable energy deployments started stagnating. For 3 years, that same agency had already found that investment in renewables was on the decline. Less money going in, fewer projects going out, despite nearly a decade of prices going down and governmental measures specifically designed to spur action. Prices had quite simply never been lower, but investment and deployment weren't following through like the conventional economic story of cheaper product wins predicts. But this is still around the same time that the fossil fuel giants, like Shell, were announcing to the public their net zero goal for 2050, which they said would be coming from a massive upscaling in renewables. But look beyond the flashy headlines, and these stats about declining investment and deployment start making more sense. Shell was actually a lot less committed to the renewable transition than they wanted to make it seem. What looked like bold, definitive statements of sustainability in the press were actually tepid, conditional half-promises that didn't commit Shell to any sustainable action whatsoever, and highlighted what matters most when private enterprise looks to invest in renewables. Specifically, Shell put 3 conditions on its transition to renewables. 1, that the society, a term that is very much not defined, would follow through on the Paris agreements. 2, that this venture would be, quote, self-funded. And most importantly, 3, Shell will only invest substantially in renewables if and only if it delivers the appropriate profits, which for Shell means an 8 to 12% return on investment.
Now, that is a business of the future, a business that doesn't really exist at this point in time. So that's why we want to move cautiously, and we will only ramp up this business as we see these proof points of an 8 to 12% return come through.
That last condition is the most important one you need to remember. The first 2 are other ways for Shell to bail out, clauses that basically amount to little more than promising to jump if they get pushed out of the plane. But that last condition, profitability, is the most crucial. Shell, and this goes for basically every other fossil fuel company that's come out with a net zero promise, places its renewable transition on the condition of a high, in this case 8 to 12%, return on investment. And the sad part is that that just won't happen. And they already know that. According to just about every estimate, no one can expect those kinds of returns on renewables. Quote, today, then, solar and wind-based energy generation for the most part are not attractive investment propositions. The low cost and ready availability of renewables, as Butler observes, means few projects can make returns of more than 5 to 8%. Merchants cite similar figures for renewable project returns, which, she says, usually range from 6 to 8%. Others give even lower numbers, 4 to 6%. Shell, BP, Total, and all their little dinosaur juice friends can bask in the great press of being the good fossil fuel companies, committed to righting their wrongs and transitioning us away from fossil fuels. But behind the scenes, they know they'll never fulfill their arbitrary profit conditions, and therefore, they'll never need to keep their promise. They will not invest in renewables, and they have an out. Because, by contrast, oil and gas are still massively profitable. At the same time these net zero declarations were being made, Total was opening up new fossil fuel projects in Uganda, Angola, and Brazil.
And so, JT, I find that clip so, it blew my tiny little mind, frankly. When people critique about renewables, they usually say that it's too expensive or that they won't work on a wild scale. Often these people have connections to the fossil fuel industry or other forms of energy production. But what you're saying, it seems here, that renewable energy isn't going to work because it isn't profitable enough for corporations. It's not that it doesn't work. It's actually that people just aren't making enough money out of it. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, sure. So the TLDR of this is that at the end of the day, capitalism is entirely beholden to the profit motive. If something isn't profitable, it's just not going to get done. That's just how it works. So in the case of renewables versus fossil fuels, you've got a few factors to consider. On the one hand, the price of renewable energy, and in this video, we're specifically talking about solar, that price is going down to the point where it's now often cheaper to make use of than fossil fuels. But that being said, that just because it's cheaper doesn't mean it's going to generate the most profits for the owner class. And the people at the head of these companies, they are notoriously short-sighted. So there's really no such thing as long-term planning anymore, really. So when they look at these two options, the solar versus coal, for example, if they have to make an additional investment in order to get up to speed on solar, building up like infrastructure, training people, stuff like that, and then they'll only see a significant return 5-10 years down the line, that option is it's off the table. They're not going to consider it because the profit motive demands not only profits, but constantly increasing profits every quarter. Even if you had like the most benevolent CEO in history, which is not the case, by the way, these people are all incredible ghouls, you still wouldn't see a large-scale adoption of renewable energy because it's not conscience or science or common sense that drives these initiatives. The owner class is just as beholden to the logic of capitalism as the rest of us. They just happen to benefit a hell of a lot more than we do. Bottom line is profits at the end of the day.
It seems so obvious now that you say that, but I don't think many people in the environmental movement have really faced up to that reality.
Yeah.
Even when we see headlines that say things like the top 100 corporations are responsible for 71% of global emissions, or even when we see news articles saying things like Goldman Sachs asks, is curing patients a sustainable business practice? There's always this sense that somebody's got to profit from it. I remember watching the UK version of Shark Tank. It's called Dragon's Den. And somebody came in with this great product. And all the sharks or the dragons, the billionaires that were there, said, yeah, this is a great product. But the problem is it's too good. And people will buy this once and that's your business over. They wanted to make the product less good so that it will be obsolete in a couple of years or will just break. And this is something that's really at the heart of capitalism versus the planet. Do you think the climate movement has really addressed this fundamental truth? And if not, why not?
As doomer as it sounds, no, absolutely not. I think, unfortunately, the climate movement, like a lot of other social movements, has been pretty effectively co-opted by liberals. And what I mean by that is They take a structural problem and then they very vocally demand individual solutions to it. So, go vegan, use paper straws, bike to work, stuff like that. And that's not to say that these things aren't good as individual actions. It's just that's what they are. It's individualized. It's not. It's the liberal worldview fails to grapple with the fact that no matter how many individuals you can get on board, millions, whatever, it's still a drop in the bucket compared to the carbon emissions of giant corporations or the military industrial complex. But beyond that, I mean, you can take any one of those liberal solutions, going vegan, for example. That's great. Awesome. I mean, it sounds nice. How are you going to sell that to people who don't have the time to change their meal planning because they work 70 hours a week? Or to people who can barely afford chicken, and now you're asking them to pay 5 times more for a chicken alternative? Or how are you going to ask someone who lives outside the city to bike 30 miles to work every day? Like, I live in the US, and it's incredibly dangerous to walk or to bike to work. Like, every third car here is a truck that's lifted higher than my head. I can't even see over the hood. But even if we were to give these people the benefit of the doubt, say we all go vegan, we use paper straws, we bike to work, as soon as you set foot on a cruise ship or like a transatlantic flight, all your hard work is offset. That's it. It's gone. It's hard to get through to people, I think, just how little effect individual actions have, even on a grand scale. I mean, we struggle to have 1 million people attend to anything. And if that's all you can muster to become vegan in the face of like animal agriculture and stuff, that's not going to work. And let's be real, a lot of these granola liberal types, they love their European vacations, they love their Disney cruises. And the bottom line is that all of these individual actions, they're just way too small to actually make a difference. If we want to actually address the problem and do so soon enough to keep the earth habitable, we have to dismantle the system that incentivizes the industrial use and production of fossil fuels. That means the oil and gas lobby has to go. That means cruise ships has to go. That's transatlantic flights. Really, there's not much cause for that. For like a lot of businessmen, businesswomen, business people will take these flights. They'll fly from New York to London once a month or more. To what end? You could have a Zoom meeting. Like, there are all of these steps that could be taken structurally to fix this problem before going out and badgering people to use straws that disintegrate in their daily expensive coffee that was produced by exploited laborers in the third world. So it's nice. Like, yeah, go vegan if you can. More power to you. Animal agriculture is cruel, inhumane, incredibly polluting, stuff like that. But to look at it as a solution to a structural problem, I think, is short-sighted.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself, I don't think. Another thing that really blew my mind about this video that we just watched, or at least the part I didn't show you, so you can go and watch that at youtube.com/@secondthought if you want to see more. What you were talking about in a later part of that is how the profit motive has really shaped the world we live in. Could you explain, for instance, how and why water, which is a pretty much perfectly renewable resource, was a better choice for energy production during the Industrial Revolution, but was in fact ditched in favor of coal or other dirtier forms of energy?
Yeah, so in the video, I briefly mentioned some historical precedents for why we're not seeing a large-scale adoption of renewables. And the example I use is water. For those who are interested, I'm citing Andreas Malm's book, Fossil Capital. It's a great book, great cover. But anyway, during the Industrial Revolution, we were coming up with new ways to generate power. And a couple of the options we considered were the burning of coal and then the capturing of energy of flowing water. And coal had some advantages, like being able to be used to power trains pretty easily and being easy to transport in useful quantities. But when it came to generating power for factories and their machines, water and coal were pretty much equivalent, with water having some added perks, like being cheaper and not polluting the atmosphere, though we didn't really understand the concept of man-made climate change at the time. So if water was cheaper and it was cleaner and it required less human labor to extract energy from, why would we go with steam power via coal? And then the solution, or the one-word answer to that, I guess, is exploitation. The budding capitalist class of the time needed an easily available source of labor. So it was in their interest to bring more people from the countryside into densely populated cities. That way, if a worker quit or was maimed or killed due to horrendous workplace conditions, which happened a lot, they could easily be replaced by any number of other poor, miserable people. And using coal made this possible. So you can store huge amounts of coal in the city. Whereas if you wanted to use the power of flowing water, you'd have to build your factory at an appropriate source, and then you'd lose access to the unemployed masses. So if you say you build your racism factory on a river somewhere in the countryside, and then you get a sufficient workforce to run your machines, that's awesome. But what happens when the workers strike? Where are you going to find scabs to replace them? You won't, because all of those people are in the cities because you brought them in. So location became super important to capitalists. And another factor was consistency. With water, you're kind of at the mercy of nature because the flow of water fluctuates. Whereas with coal, as long as you've got desperate people and big enough piles of coal, you can run your factory at peak efficiency 24/7. I mean, you can have people working around the clock as long as you can staff the machines.
Well, as long as we're doing book recommendations, one that came up to me when you were just talking there is Forces of Production by David Noble, the historian from MIT. And he really talks about automation in that book and how the history of it has really shaped society. And what he showed in the book is that even US government studies themselves constantly came back showing that it would be much more efficient in terms of running factories to give the workers on the front lines the tools and the controls to enable and control production themselves, to make decisions about what would be made. And in that way, they could just eliminate the entire managerial class altogether. That was constantly shown to be a much more efficient way of running a factory. And yet, that never happened. It virtually is unknown in any sort of factory in the United States or in Western Europe for this to happen. And it's pretty clear why. It's an ideological position, isn't it? Because if we did get rid of managers, suddenly we'd have a much more equal society, and people would start thinking about the other sorts of things that we might equalize in society, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
In terms of changing society, something I've been thinking about for quite a bit is to what extent do you think being a content creator or somebody who's online a lot is valuable to producing social change?
I think it depends on who and what we're talking about. I think investigative journalism that exposes corruption is useful in moving the needle. I think well-produced documentaries like Abby Martin's Gaza Fights for Freedom, those are valuable. Podcasts like Blowback are valuable. But on the other hand, I'd say that a large percentage of people doing what I do on platforms like YouTube really aren't all that useful unless we're actively driving people to get engaged in organizations and on the ground movements. At the end of the day, it's just entertainment. YouTube is just kind of built that way. That's not to say there's no good and useful content on the platform. It's just first and foremost, we have to cater to the almighty algorithm, which can really defang a radical message because you have to be very careful what you say or show on screen. Like for me, I did a couple videos on police brutality, and I had to tread such a fine line of showing them not like pounding some dude's head into a curb, but maybe pepper spraying them a little bit. And then no matter how hard I try, especially with topics like that, with the police, I get age restricted and I get demonetized. And when that happens, your channel's performance just tanks because people have to sign in. They have to show their ID or link their ID to their account in order to just watch the video. So view count goes way down. The people who do watch it don't provide any revenue because it's been demonetized. And that really disincentivizes people like me to produce radical content, which requires you to show that sort of thing. So just the nature of the platform makes us a little bit less versatile, I think, in disseminating radical information. But we do try. And I think I found a pretty good balance with my recent content in what I show, how I explain things. Without getting slapped with the age restriction and stuff like that. But then there are content creators that are just 100% detrimental to the cause, like Debate Bros. I won't name any names, but you people know who I'm talking about. Debate Bros are just toxic little clout goblins. So yeah, overall, there are some useful avenues online to radicalization, but then there are some that are less useful as well.
Yeah, I guess we were always living in a kind of golden age at one point when we really thought that some of the biggest corporations in world history would allow us to use their platforms like YouTube forever to disseminate knowledge and not, at very least, hamstring us or chop us down by the knees with various tricks that they constantly use, like age restriction or just, blacklisting you or gray listing you to the point where people just can't find this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And you seem to have done a really good job of getting around that, or at least finding some way of fighting back something or swimming against the currents.
Yeah, well, I try. I mean, it's trial and error with YouTube, really. And every time there's a big change to the algorithm, there's not much. You can't really talk to a human, no matter how big your channel is. Every once in a while, they'll say, "Oh, we're doing one-on-one mentoring with YouTube people from YouTube." And it's like, that's great, but I just want to be able to get feedback on why X video was age restricted or demonetized or shadow banned from results, like my CIA video. The CIA is a terrorist organization. That one didn't even appear in results. It didn't appear on my page for a while until I tweeted about it, and that for a long time was my most engaged with tweet, because that got picked up big time because I tested it. And if you type in the exact title of a video into the YouTube search bar, no matter how small the host channel is, that video will appear. And so there's me with 1 million subscribers at the time, and I posted a video, and you type in the exact title, it just didn't show up in results. So there's a lot of sketchy stuff that goes on at YouTube, and I don't want to be like conspiratorial and stuff that they're completely beholden to the intelligence community, but there are agreements. They do have agreements with the intelligence community. Google does. So we do have to kind of fight against the current, like you said, just to get our message out there, and that takes a little bit of tact, and it takes some. I think I was lucky in that I kind of get a pass because I was grandfathered in. I had 250,000 or 750,000 subscribers before I made the switch, and now it's a little bit harder for them to quietly keep my content down.
Sure, yeah. And as I've been investigating for years now, the links between Google and the US national security state are manifold.
Yeah.
The amount of senior Google employees who a few months ago were working in high up positions in the CIA and other three-letter agencies is really extraordinary. But one way I've found that you can get hold of a human at Google is to tell them that you're a journalist and you're writing a negative story about them. And they, trust me, once they get your phone, they will be calling you constantly. I'll just put that out there. Anyway.
I have to give it a try.
Moving on. You do a lot of great stuff. I didn't really know what to choose, but I thought I'd move on to the economy now. This second clip I want to show you is a little bit shorter. It's about economics and specifically about recessions. So let's play that now.
A recession is coming, no matter what. We know it with 100% certainty. What we don't know yet is exactly when. Though, based on current trends, most people expect it to be sometime soon. Not to be too obvious with my thesis statement or anything, but in this video, we're going to break down why we know for sure that a recession is on its way. We'll also talk about the fact that these crises where profits go down are, counterintuitively, a good thing for capitalists, unlike what you might hear them say. And then we'll take things a step further and talk about preventing recessions. Because the truth is, we could stop recessions almost entirely if we wanted to.
All right, short and sweet there. Now, you made a number of big claims there. And to get the full explanation, you'll have to head over to youtube.com/@secondthought. But while you're here, JT Chapman, you made a couple of big claims I want to pick up on there. First, you said a recession is definitely coming. Why do you say that?
The short answer is that's just how capitalism works. The system is entirely dependent on the boom and bust cycle. It's built into the proper functioning of what people like to call free market economies. At any point, you can say a recession is coming because it's always true. Sometimes it takes longer than other times. We usually have a recession every 7 to 10-ish years, and we're seeing them increase in frequency and severity. Things go really well for a while, market speculation goes through the roof, produces a bubble somewhere, and then eventually the bubble pops and screws over everyone except the people who caused the crisis, with 2008 being the prime example with the housing market. And a lot of people suspect the next recession will have at least an element of that. Like housing prices in the States are just absolutely insane these days. Like what used to be, considered a starter home is now out of reach of, not just people who would traditionally buy a starter home, like a couple just starting out, but, someone who's been working in the workforce for 10, 20 years. And so that kind of thing is unsustainable. And then eventually it has to crash, the market, quote unquote, correcting itself. And then you've got these giant firms like BlackRock swoop in, snatch up these homes at bargain bin prices, and then hold them captive on the rental market for the next 30 years. And that's what we're seeing from 2008. Most of those houses are still held captive by institutional investors. They weren't snapped up by normal people because normal people didn't have the money.
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing these gigantic corporations like, is it BlackRock, that, buying up however many trillions and whatever dollars of homes in the US, to the point where some horrendous percentage of American homes are now bought by these companies and not actually by human beings. Or even you could talk about land as well, where Bill Gates is now the owner of 250,000 acres of US farmland. And it's extraordinary, the sort of wealth accumulation that's going on in the housing market right now. The second thing I wanted to pick up on that quick clip is that you said we could stop recessions almost entirely if we wanted to. Most people think of recessions as like a cycle of booms and busts, and they're as ever changing and as permanent as the tides. But you're saying otherwise. How could we stop recessions?
Yeah. So if you look at non-capitalist economies like the Soviet Union, for example, we don't see the kind of Wild West economic speculation like we do in places like the US. Stability and longevity are prioritized over exponential growth. You can look at it like bodybuilding, I guess. If you want to build your muscle, if you want to get bigger, you can consider your health and take things slow. You can make steady progress, make common sense changes to your diet or your exercise regimen. Or you can inject yourself full of steroids, balloon up to 300 pounds of muscle, and die at 50. Planned economies take the long run into account, whereas capitalist economies prioritize short-term growth at the expense of stability and egalitarianism. And one cool thing, in my opinion, about the history of socialist economies is you'll often see a single famine or other crisis right at the beginning of the experiment when they're just getting their feet under them, coming out from under the boot of the old regime. And then you never see a major logistical crisis again. This is what happened in China. It happened with the USSR. It was trending in that direction with Chile, with Project Cybersyn before the US installed a fascist regime and crushed the experiment. Planned economies work. It's just a matter of what you want to prioritize. And with the technology we have now these days, it's only gotten that much easier to plan for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I studied the Soviet Union a lot in university, and one thing that did come up from the economics courses, or the look at economics that we had, was even though pretty much everyone involved in teaching it was very critical of the Soviet Union, there was still this sense that the numbers don't lie. And there was just this extraordinary extended growth period across the USSR for decades. The sorts of GDP rises that are barely known, if ever, under capitalist economies. And yeah, it does seem like if you can get it right, planning can really work very nicely.
Absolutely. I mean, quality of life drastically increased. There are studies looking at the amount of calories consumed in the Soviet Union versus the United States at the same time. Like the average person had a better, healthier diet, a higher consumption of calories. Everything from economic production steadily trending upwards to just the overall health of the society. When you take the long term into account, when you're not just chasing the next $1 million, you're not just looking one quarter ahead, suddenly the road really smooths out and you don't have to grapple with these existential crises every 7 to 10 years.
Yeah. One thing that the US had over the Soviet Union was this idea of a free press. And I remember when the Soviet Union sent its commissars to the United States, US officials were very keen to show off this free press to the Soviet officials. And they were allowed into all the newsrooms in the country and the television spaces. And they were expecting the Soviets to be blown away by this. But instead, they got very perplexed questions from the Soviets saying, how does everybody think the same thing and produce the same content if you're not telling them to? And that was not the answer that they were expecting.
Yeah. Funny what happens when it's the corporations that have a large hand in deciding what reality looks like.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to show you one last clip from Second Thought before we leave. And this is an interesting one because for all you're talking about here, you actually draw inspiration from Walmart, of all places, the gigantic US conglomerate that controls so much of the food supply and distribution across not only America, but many other countries as well. So let's watch that now.
Capitalist markets produce crushing inequality. They require it. Market capitalism is stuck in a constant boom and bust cycle that throws millions of people into sudden poverty, while enriching those with enough capital to outmaneuver the collapse. Really, how many once-in-a-lifetime crashes have kids born in the 2000s already seen? Stagflation and monopolization are inevitable. In fact, they're the norm. But the levers to remedy them are kept out of democratic control. And not to be that guy, but now that it's back in the news, if you need to bail out private banks every time they crash, which seems like it's a lot, because it would destroy the economy if you didn't, maybe private banks shouldn't be given economy-destroying potential in the first place. We very clearly need to imagine implementing something different, or the vast majority of the planet will continue to suffer from decisions only a few people get to make. And interestingly, we can actually look at Walmart for inspiration.
All right. Do you want to care to explain yourself, JT, here? What on earth is going on? This is a very odd place for someone like you to be drawing inspiration from. Are you some kind of economic pervert, or am I missing something? What do you think we can learn about Walmart about the economy?
Yeah, it does seem kind of weird at first glance. So in that video, I'm citing a book called The People's Republic of Walmart. It's a great book. It's really short, highly recommended. But basically what it says is that a lot of these massive companies like Walmart or Amazon already make use of central planning technology that could easily be applied to larger economies. We're talking like municipalities, cities, even countries. Like if you think about it in terms of GDP, Walmart and Amazon are basically already their own little countries. With the Walmart example, every single aspect of running this massive business is planned from beginning to end. Inputs to outputs, raw materials, everything. Partnerships, transportation, figuring out demand before the demand even arises so that they're never out of stock of particular items, things like that. We actually had a really interesting episode of The Deprogram, which is my podcast with Hakeem and Ugatnik, where we talked to Tomas Hardin, who's an expert in cybernetic planning. It was a really fascinating conversation. And basically, he was saying that we've got everything we need to start planning the economy. We've got the technology, we've got the data gathering abilities, for better or worse. And it's just a matter of political will. Like we see all the time stories about just how much data any given corporation has on the average citizen. So it's like, why not put that data to use, actually making things in a manner that makes sense? Why not take a common sense approach to planning, production, logistics, transportation, growing food to allocating resources for factory use? You can do all of that with, you don't have to say central planning because people get scared when you say central, but a technological means to guide the economy in a way that is healthy for growth, rather than just what we see now, where we accumulate so much and then there's this massive crash and all of it is lost plus some.
Yeah, I guess. And it might not even need to be that centralized. We could also have elements of decentralized planning
for sure.
as well.
Yeah.
To the point where, as I was talking before about David Noble, about actually putting tools in the hands of ordinary people to decide the fates of their companies and their organizations as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like if you could even apply that at the individual co-op company level, where you've got a database of all your resources and stuff like that, and you see you're going to have a shortage of XYZ. You're like, okay, we're going to send away to another company that has an excess of this because it's logged in this municipal system that we have for your city or whatever. There are infinite ways to implement this, and I think people get wrapped around the axle thinking that there's going to be one mega mind supercomputer controlling everything, and that's probably not even close to necessary. In fact, I know it's not necessary. If you want to go listen to that episode of The Deprogram, really, really interesting stuff. I mean, the average person with a decent laptop can run a planning simulation of millions of inputs. So it doesn't take all that much.
Yeah, I mean, I guess most nerds have played one of those tycoon games where you start,
Yeah.
building a city or, building a theme park or something, and you're, centrally planning everything. And I guess we often think about the societies we live in as like these sorts of sea of free market where tiny traders are making tiny little decisions that,
Mhm.
multiply or subtract from their total, output. And that's basically how the situation works. But in reality, we live in a society where just a handful of corporations, these giant multinationals, have
Mhm.
enormous power over our society, and they really set the agenda. So it's much less like, little boats in a sea, and it's much more like giant continents sucking up all the water.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. You have, if you look at food or media or whatever, you have what basically amounts to a monopoly. You've got one or two corporations that control 600 subsidiaries. So all the cereal you think you have the choice between, it's all produced on the same conveyor belt or in the same factory by the same people. So that's just something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, switching track. So as one of the biggest content creators out there, especially one that's not hucking cryptocurrency or telling teenage boys that they need to be more alpha, what would be your advice to somebody thinking about creating stuff for YouTube or another social media outlet, or somebody who already has?
Hmm. That's a tough one. I mean, I think it depends on what you want to do with it. If you're trying to spread a message, like what I'm doing with my channel, go easy. Like, don't try not to trip up either the algorithm or your viewers by going too hard. You don't need to wear a Ushanka in your videos. You don't need to have a giant Soviet flag behind you or anything like that. Just be a normal person. Bathe, get a haircut, put on a nice shirt, put some lights up, things like that, where
Clean
you are
your
not
room. You're sounding very much
exactly.
like Jordan Peterson there.
No, what have I done? Yeah. But yeah, honestly, like there's a lot to being presentable, and it doesn't take much effort. And that's kind of my approach. I was talking to Luna Oy on one of the deprogram episodes, and I described what I'm trying to make myself as the tactical white guy. Like if my video comes on in a suburban home, like with a little old lady who's afraid of everything, am I going to scare her away? And what I try to do is make sure the answer to that is no. Like I dress whatever respectfully, however you want to say what these people think of as normal, like a blank slate, boring person. That's what I want to be. It's an unfortunate reality that if someone with a nose ring or someone who is not white, or maybe like even in some cases, someone who is a woman gets in front of the camera and is presented to that same suburban housewife, they're going to tune out immediately. So I guess my advice is be a boring white guy, but no, that's at least what my approach has been based on my characteristics, what I can bring to the table, and I've found some success with that. But um, other than that, it's the type of thing, if you want to produce online content, you can learn 80% of what you need in like a month. And you're going to spend the rest of your life learning the other 20% of refining your craft and things like that. You're going to, it's not hard to set up a camera with the correct shutter speed and stuff like that. That's very, very easy. It's not hard to set up a light at 45 degrees to your camera. That's very easy. What's more difficult is finding your voice, finding how you want to present your information, how you want to package stuff that is often very dry in a way that is interesting to people, in a way that makes them care. At the end of the day, it is propaganda. That's how you need to treat it.
Yeah, I guess I'm always amazed at the creativity of people who are able to make stuff for YouTube or for Twitter or even worse for TikTok. I have no idea how people can condense a message down into like 30 seconds and hit that virality switch and people just watch it.
Oh, God bless the TikTok kids. There are so many Gen Z uh, content creators. Rewald, another guy we had on the deprogram, fantastic. Like his stuff, under a minute long, and he packs the entire history of the CIA into the video. And like, how did you do that? I tried to do that, and it took me half an hour. And so all of these new tools at our disposal, I guess I'm over the hill now. Like I probably won't do TikTok because it's beyond me. But it's cool to see the younger generation getting on that and using it effectively as a means for agitation and education.
Yeah, fans of James Raywell should keep tuning into the Mintcast. I'll just say that. So
Ooh.
has your YouTube career taken you places that you weren't expecting?
Well, I never really expected to go and hang out by a blown up train and giant chemical spill, like I did for the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment. But we went there and covered that and talked to some locals, and that was pretty meaningful because it was, you see this stuff on the news. It's like it's covered as some apocalyptic thing, but it's not humanized really. And then when I went there and just hung out and talked to the locals, like the one dude, we were interviewing him in his home, and it was about a third of a mile from the crash site, and that was the first time he had been back in his house since the derailment. And so like everything was, what was it called? He had some kind of chemical people come out and do sweeps of his house and stuff, and he's like, well, it's probably safe to go in. It's like, geez, there's all these little things you don't even think about. But other than that, it's interesting these days. You don't really have to travel to all these places that you're covering necessarily in order to connect with people and communicate their stories and things like that. And that's been really cool to me. I have a lot of people reach out to me via email or Twitter DM or whatever, asking me to look into what's happening in their country and apply the same analysis that I do to like the United States to India or Mexico or wherever. And it always leads to interesting conversations about how these struggles are universal. And that's something that, socialists are always preaching. It's like it is one global struggle of the working class versus the owner class. But it's only when you start to hear these individual stories that it kind of starts to click in your head. Like it makes sense intellectually before that, but once it becomes a personal thing, then it starts to really, really dig at you and kind of not matter more exactly, but it feels more pressing and more real.
Do you have any ambitions for travel or anything with your channel coming up?
Yeah. I have an 8-month-old daughter now. It's our first. So I haven't left home much recently or slept. But I would love to go to the DPRK and shoot something there if possible. Because that is one of those things that there is such a story behind why things are the way they are in that part of the world, the divide between North and South, the U.S. involvement there. I mean, Korea is called the Forgotten War for a reason. It's been completely buried. And so people look at the DPRK and like, yeah, that's kind of a weird dystopian place. And like, okay, if you look at the material conditions and what has caused this and what they are currently dealing with, they've been basically living under a siege for 50 years. So I would love to be able to go and kind of just poke around and talk to people and explore what the reality of the situation is and bring that back to people in the United States and in the West more broadly, who are pretty heavily propagandized against socialist countries and North Korea in particular. Also, I'd love to go to China. I'd love to go to Cuba. Really, I'd like to do all the actually existing socialism stuff. I was hoping to be able to go to Cuba around May Day this year, but the logistics just didn't work out. But hopefully within the next year or two, I'll be able to make a trek over there, do something about Cuba.
And you've recently just started a new channel, haven't you? First Thought.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell us about that? Give us a quick plug for it.
Yeah, sure. So First Thought, we at the Deprogram had gotten a lot of requests or complaints saying that they don't know where to gather or to just consume news from a leftist perspective on a weekly basis or daily basis or whatever. There's not a source for that. And so like, well, we could give it a try. And so we did. we decide a news show. It's like 5 or 6 minutes long. It's 3 times a week, where we aggregate some of the more noteworthy news of the week, and we put our spin on it. We call it biased news, and that's I think important to say and to help people understand that there is no such thing as unbiased media. It's just whether you're upfront about your bias and whether that bias is informed by the interest of the capitalist class or the working class. And so that's what we're trying to do with that.
Yeah, exactly. I find a lot of the time the people who have the most absolutely wedded ideology, the sort of really craven ideologues, are specifically the ones that insist that they are fair and balanced and that they don't have any kind of ideology and they're just reporting the facts. In fact, frankly, I'm probably just reading from Fox News's About Us right now because they're some of the worst for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, always the people who are upfront about where they're coming from, which I think we at Mint Press News pretty much are, tend to be ones that you can, I don't even want to use the word trust because I don't think we should trust media. I think we should be critically evaluating everything we read. But generally, the ones that I find are spinning it the least tend to be the ones that are much more upfront about their biases.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it doesn't take much to be upfront about what is informing your analysis. Like it's like I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm very open about the fact that I'm a socialist, and therefore my analysis is informed by care for the working class and is opposed directly to the interests of, corporations, billionaires, the status quo, all that stuff that we like to talk about. But there is a trend, especially in the West, for liberals to see their particular ideology as default, as a tabula rasa from which people can build then their own worldview on top of it. But that is a place where you should start. This it's interesting that there are, I think, a tremendous amount of true believers that liberalism is a non-ideology, to the point where most people do not even consider themselves to be liberals. They're just people. And yet they've internalized all of this neoliberal worldview, and that colors how they see everything else.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about, if we want to get intellectual again, is what the Italian radical intellectual Antonio Gramsci called hegemony, which is the process by which the people at the top of society make sure that their ideas, their outlooks, and their view on the world becomes second nature to everyone else, even when those views are often diametrically opposed to the interests of most people.
Yeah, exactly. To badly paraphrase Marx, in every era, the ideas have been the ideas of the ruling class or something like that, the dominant ideas. And that's how it goes. Those with influence get to dictate what we think to an extent.
Well, you're pushing back against that very much, JT Chapman of Second Thought, First Thought, and the Deprogram. Is there anywhere where people should follow you?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube as Second Thought. If you're interested in that kind of thing, it's very beginner friendly. So if you've got family, you want to try to turn on to some of these ideas, toss them that way. If you're looking for quick news bites 3 times a week, First Thought. And if you're looking for a place to unwind and get some socialist perspectives, but not be doomer pilled about it, the Deprogram, our podcast, is available wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all the rest. And that is once a week. And if you're a patron, what's that? Patreon.com/the Deprogram. You get a bonus episode every month.
All right, JT Chapman, thank you very much for joining us on the Mintcast today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So that was JT Chapman there. I'll finish up by saying Mint Press News is just starting its annual funding drive right now. So if you are in an economic position, you can support us on Indiegogo or Patreon. The links for that will be down in the description below. Thanks for listening, guys. Cheers.